Hi there guys, back with another video in our Where Next to Conquer series, where we're outlining some different options for you if you've had enough of GW and you want to try something different, be you actively boycotting them over recent activities, or whether you just decided that you want something a little bit different from 40k. So today we're going to take a look at one of the things that I know slightly more about than the others, and that is Warlord Games offerings in Bolt Action and KONFLIKT 47. Now, I've worked for Warlord, and when you first get a job with Warlord, you have to meet the owners of the company, which is quite cool. So I sat down, had a nice chat with John Stallard, who's the guy who owns Warlord, created Warlord. He's ex-GW, like most of the people who go off and do these alternate companies are. And I was chatting to him about it and what GW do as opposed to what Warlord do. And the way he described it is that essentially Warlord it's the seagulls behind the trawler. So GW is most people's entry into the wargaming hobby, for better or for worse. They grab people as kids, and some people stay with GW, and some people age out, whatever age that might be. Now, the way John Stallard described it is basically people, when they've had enough of GW, they look to Warlord. They go, oh, I can get 20 dudes for 30 quid, or I can get a tank for £20 and it's not £50. So we're going to have a look at Warlord, and I'm going to go through the website again, because that kind of worked with one-page rules. Even though I know a lot about this, I can just add my own thoughts onto it. So, although we're going to have a look at the store in a minute, and this will be a longer video than the OPR one, we're going to look at the boltaction.com website because it's actually quite good. So again, there'll be screens up. So if we go to what you need, you'll see that it shows you need 2 armies, a table, dice and tape measure, a rule book, and some terrain. Pretty standard. But what I really like about this, and I want to draw attention to, is it says, you need to get terrain cover to make the game better, and you can buy terrain or build it from scratch. But for your first few games, a pile of books serves well as a hill, and a few boxes as buildings. Buildings? Oh, these guys. I pointed out loads of typos to them when I was there because I'm autistic and it gets out to me, but let's just say that they're very, very slow to change things. Very slow. I like that. That's what it was like back in the old days of GW. My first games of 2nd edition were literally books, green cloth on top of it, and I don't think we used boxes for buildings, but I think I made my first few buildings out of those polystyrene trays that came with the models, the metal models back in the day. There was a White Dwarf article which was later reprinted into a book that showed you how to make those polystyrene trays into ruined buildings, which was really cool. So it's nice to see that they're carrying over that kind of thing. Next up, we're going to be obviously collecting an army, and you've got different types here. So you've got the infantry, you've got your tanks. Now it's worth noting the tanks aren't quite to scale, but we're going to talk about the models in a little bit. Aircraft, which I never really saw. You can just call airstrikes in, but you don't need to have aircraft to represent it. Transports, which again are never to scale, never looks right, unfortunately. Obviously your artillery guns, which are always metal, and we'll get onto that. And then obviously the historical inspiration. Now I want to talk about this because one of the great things about Bolt Action is obviously it is a historical game, so you don't have to worry about them coming round and retconning anything because it's true to history, it's true to the past. You've got things like your female representation because you've got things like the Night Witches, and different countries' armies had female, not regiments so much as squads. There is that representation, but it's representation as it was at the time. Nobody's going to turn around and suddenly go, right, the SAS or the commandos suddenly got women in them, because they didn't. And even now, combat roles for women are vastly reduced as opposed to men, because it's real life. So that's one thing to bear in mind. The other thing to bear in mind is that even though this hasn't obviously got a made-up lore like Warhammer 40,000, that deep, impressive, expansive lore, you will find that the World War II theatre of war had just as many amazing events. So I did a lot of research on different operations. I was listening to a podcast while I was working about World War II. I actually got quite into it, and unfortunately my experience at Warlord soured this quite a lot, so I just dropped out of all of it. which is a shame because I was finding it quite interesting. But I was rather put off by my experience, and I'll quickly talk about that because there's nothing wrong with Warlord as a company. They're great. In fact, I think they're much better than GW. They remind me of GW back in the day. Unfortunately, my experience working at Warlord was ruined by one person. There's one person that nobody likes there, but unfortunately they're in quite a position of power, quite a position of influence, and they just seem to go around every day making everybody's life worse. So I couldn't tolerate it and I quit. I was there for about 7 months or so in total. But I was having discussions with the sales managers. I was having discussions with people about products. I was even on the verge of developing a game, which I can't talk about. Actually, no, I didn't sign an NDA. Sod it. I had an idea of doing a zombie-style dungeon crawler for their KONFLIKT 47 range, which we're going to get to in a bit. And I thought that would be a really good idea, and I was actively speaking to a few people trying to get that sort of underway, or at least find somebody who'd be willing to work with me to do it. I was definitely aiming high. I was definitely above my station kind of thing, but what can I say? I was ambitious. I'm getting older and I've got experience in these areas. I've got prior. I've got experience and a drive to do it, which unfortunately got a little bit murdered by my experience at Warlord, which is a real shame. But anyway, carrying on because I'm rambling without Matt even being here. There's plenty of historical inspiration, which is all free. They do books for different theatres and stuff, and it's very good. But you can just jump onto Wiki, type in the name of a battle, look it up. So it's all there, and I'd recommend it. You know, it's all very, very interesting. So the next thing you need to do, obviously, is going to be paint your models, fight a battle. You'll get into this a little bit because I really like some of the mechanics in bolt action. This is one of the things that I think makes it a fantastic game, and the game is much better than 40k. You will not find many people disagreeing with that. And one of the great things that this game is based on is the order dice system. Now, rather than having your entire army go, kill 20% of the other opponent's army, and then the other opponent gets to respond with 20% of the rest of their army, you get a dice for each of your units in the game. So your transport and dudes will get a dice, one of your squads will get a dice, one of your tanks will get a dice, and say your artillery unit will get another dice. You put all those dice in the bag, along with your opponent's dice, and then you randomly draw one dice per turn. And that is basically your activation for that turn. So it might be that you get 3 activations in a turn, but you're unlikely to draw it again because there's only going to be 1 of your dice in there and 4 of your opponents. So it's down to the odds. When you take out that dice, it has orders on it. So you turn it to the order that you want to give that squad or that unit, and you put it next to it. This is a really, really cool way of activating. You can get them to put their heads down to try and give you extra cover. You can make them run or advance. You can tactically affect the game in response to what your opponent is doing, as opposed to waiting for your opponent to do all their stuff and then going, right, well, I've got this left, I guess I can do some stuff now. So I really like that element of the game, and that is the core of the bolt action system. The other thing to bear in mind is that shooting is nothing like 40k. 40k, you pick up 10 dice, you roll them all, you hit on 2s or 3s. You're probably going to pick up the 1s because you've got some stupid rule that allows you to do that. You're going to end up hitting 80% of your shots, and then you're going to end up wounding with about 70% of the shots after that. So the kill rate is absolutely massive. In bolt action, that does not happen. You're lucky if you're hitting on 4s and 5s. You're lucky. If you fire with 10 dudes, you might hit with 3. You might kill 1 dude. That's how it is. You've even got a system where you roll a 6, you pick them all up, you need to get like a 4 plus, 5 plus, or a 6 again to hit. So it's a very different feeling game. You're not going to be mowing down stuff by the squad. You're going to be picking off 1 or 2 here and putting what are called blast markers on them, which are going to affect that unit's ability to fight. So it's a completely different game to Warhammer 40,000. That is worth bearing in mind. And then after that, obviously, it's just got your purchases and where you go from there. So that's all pretty cool. Let's have a look at the game store. Here is the bolt action page, and there are crap loads of options. You've got your starter sets. You can get a 2-player starter set, £87. Gives you sort of like a squad each, some dudes, and a rule book. The sizes of the game that you play will be completely different to anything in 40k. One, maybe two tanks in a normal size game of bolt action. At the most, you're normally going to have about 30 dudes, so a couple of squads and maybe a couple of small specialist squads, a transport, and maybe a tank. These are not massive sprawling games that take hours and hours and hours to play. So that's also worth saying. But the set is pretty cool. Tiny little bit of scenery, some dudes, rule book, £87. You'll get it for less from a discounter, at least 10% off. It's the buy-in and everything is certainly quite good. So another thing that is definitely worth saying is, how can I put this kindly? There is a certain crudeness to the models that Warlord make. Now, for one thing, the models, the plastic models, which are the better ones. Here we go, British Airborne Starter Army. So £69 gets you a load of guys, 40 infantry, 3 crude guns, artillery pieces, and 9 crew. Actually, I think this is the set I started off with when I worked there. So let's see if we can see some pictures of the dudes. So here's your infantry sprue. You'll see that this is not matching GW in terms of plastics. Warlord don't produce their own plastics. They all come in from overseas. I think it's China. Can't be 100% sure, but I think it's the sort of the is it Warforge? I think it's called, that does all of these companies' models. The plastics aren't quite as nice, but they're pretty good. So these are the plastic models. I'll try and provide some nice big pictures. They are okay. They're pretty good for models, but they are all what I would call hero proportions. So the hands are too big, the feet are too big, the heads are too big for the models, and they're kind of stocky. They're kind of chunky models. And this extends to the metal ones as well. These are the plastics, and as you can see, they just look a little bit weird, not quite right. Here are your metals, and these are pretty crude. These are pretty crude models. They tend to be a lot more expensive than the plastics as well, and yeah, they're not great. They're not great. I always try to convert plastics into the metals wherever I could. Warlord's metal casting is very good. They know what they're doing. They've got a great guy there running the metal team, but the sculpts are, they're pretty crude. This is the opposite of GW. This is great rules, good company, not crap, crude models. I'll be kind, I say crude models. I was never under any impression when I was working at Warlord that I was working with the best. Just bear that in mind. So the metals are worse than the plastics. That's absolutely spot on. But the good thing about this is you don't have to buy Warlord models. There are other companies out there that make military models, lots of them. War Games Atlantic, the Perrys, who used to work for GW, Alan Perry, I think it was, got his hand blown off by a cannon in a Civil War reenactment, and they still make models. And the good thing about the Perry miniatures is, go past all the historical stuff. That's the other thing with Warlord. If you want to do anything historical like Civil War, Napoleonics, Roman, any of that stuff, even Aztec and Americans and that kind of stuff, it's all there. But I'm just showing you bolt action because that's the closest and it's most popular, and that's the thing that people tend to jump onto as an alternative. So if we go to US infantry here, and we'll have a look at US infantry, you can see that these are more accurately proportioned models. And again, you've got about 40 models in here, I think, 35, 40 models, £22. It's pretty damn cheap. Not as many options as Warlord, but there are some other ones out there. And the other cool thing about doing anything to do with World War II or anything like that, 3D printing. You can't copyright this stuff, so therefore you can't infringe IP by doing it. So there will be loads of 3D printed options for these war models. I mean, hell, if you wanted to, you could just pick up a cheap £5 bag of soldiers and play the game. It'll probably look like crap, but you could do it. So that's bolt action. And there is loads of stuff out there. You've got loads of different factions. You've got the British, you've got the Germans, you've got the Americans, you've got the Japanese. But then on top of that, you've got the Italians, you've got the Belgians, you've got the Polish, the French, believe it or not. You've got Afrikaans. There's a lot of different scope. So you've got Oh, obviously the Soviet Union, they were kind of big. So yeah, Germany, Great Britain, USA, Soviet Union, Japan, Italy, France, more Axis fighters, more Allied fighters. And they've also do a game called Tank War where you can just play with tanks. That's bolt action. There's a lot to it, but it's a perfectly viable alternative. It's a great game. Warlord aren't going to go changing any law or anything like that. The only thing to bear in mind with bolt action is that there is a third edition coming. So while you can certainly pick up the models and stuff, if you buy a rulebook or a starter set with a rulebook in it, you're only going to get about 4 months because the new edition's coming out in September. What that does give you enough time to do in the meantime, while you look into it and do your research and maybe pick up a squad or some models to paint, is listen to nearly all of Sabaton or Bolt Action's discographies. So that's Bolt Action. We're going to look at just one more game. Actually, no, I'll tell you what, we're going to look at 2 more games real quick. One of which, I don't know if they even still do this anymore, but let's have a quick look because they were in the process of shifting it off when I was there. Here we go, Gates of Antares. So Gates of Antares is basically Bolt Action but a sci-fi version. Again, a lot of the models are very crude. There were some plastics. They shipped a lot of it off to Skytrex to produce. It's not a dead game, but it's not a fully properly supported game anymore. But just to let you know, if you did want to use those rules then there is this option to do this. And technically you could probably even use your 40k models for this, to be honest. There wouldn't be anything stopping you. Again, the problem with Gates of Antares is, in my opinion, I don't think that looks good, the Boromites. And there was a lot of that with the Gates of Antares. They're not great. I'm primarily a modeler, not a gamer. And for me, these models just didn't quite do it for me. Like they're okay. Some of the concepts are kind of nice, but they are undeniably crude. So yeah, that's Gates of Antares. I just want to quickly mention that because technically there is a sci-fi version of Bolt Action. And while we're talking about Bolt Action, next edition coming out, it's worth mentioning that this is the 3rd edition in 16 years. Let's just say that again. The 3rd edition in 16 years. Now, when I was at Warlord, I asked a lot of questions. As I said, I was always asking questions, always asking about development. And I said that you need to get another version of Bolt Action out. They basically said, look, we start working on the next action as soon as the previous edition's released. But unlike GW, who basically release a new version of a game just to get loads of money out of the punters, Warlord do it when they feel that the game needs to be updated. So you're looking at a rough lifespan of 8 years between editions. If this was GW and it had been 16 years, we would be on the 6th edition by now of their current release rate of 3 years for an edition. Just to bear that in mind. So yeah, you've got a new edition coming out, but it doesn't make this any less attractive or appealing, in my opinion. Now, the last thing I wanted to mention with Warlord Games was KONFLIKT 47. If straight up historical World War II stuff is not for you, you've got the option of KONFLIKT 47. In KONFLIKT 47, the war didn't end. It carried on. They started using a lot of mechs and Tesla weaponry and stuff like that. And as I go through the website, you'll see all these different options. Now, Warlord bought KONFLIKT 47, I think shortly before I started working for the company. And it's a cool alternative, sort of a weird war setting. The only thing I will say is that this will cost you a lot more to play than Bolt Action. And some of the models, not terrible, just not great. Just not up to Citadel's standards, that's all there is to it at the end of the day. And as I say, some of them are really expensive. These resin, these walkers and stuff, all made out of resin. I know that because I used to make them, and they cost a fortune. They come in many parts, and for what they are, because they are resin models, you need to basically look like kind of Forge World prices. So this Panzer mech, 80 quid, which I cannot honestly say is cheap or good. The equivalent in plastic would be like 20, 30 quid, like Bolt Action tanks. So that is just something to bear in mind. But it is there. It's a cool setting. They've done some good stuff. I was actually in the process of writing some short stories that I was going to submit for KONFLIKT 47 because the kind of cool stuff, like some of them use mechs and things, but the Nazis started doing experimentations and coming up with Nachtjägers, night hunters, which are kind of like vampires. Again, kind of crude, God damn it, Warlord. That's why they haven't got a zoom function. But kind of cool ideas like experimentations and stuff like that, because they're enhancing their soldiers through the occult and science methods. So yeah, it's kind of like, it is what it is. Hopefully they're going to do a lot more with Conflict 47. That would be nice. But just to show you that is another option. It's there. It's not as well supported as bolt action, but it's there and it is an alternative. And you can at least use some of the stuff in both games. So if we look on these Conflict 47 British starter set, which you'll see is £106, a lot more expensive because it's got this resin walker in it, and these infantry dudes, which are metal, the Tin Boy automatons. But if you look in the middle, the same squad as in bolt action. So there is some crossover there. These transfers and things are the same. The order dice, the blast markers, all that kind of stuff can still be used between both games. So there is some crossover. But if you just wanted a slightly more, not so set historical setting, and you want something a bit different, that's there for you. So that's just a little video again showing another option if you decided that you've had enough of GW and you want to go on to the alternate systems. John Stallard and his seagulls are happily waiting for the fish to fall off trawler. You will be better treated than your GW for sure. The models are crude, but as I said, you can probably find alternates. There's probably some 3D sculpts out there and stuff, and certainly with the historical bolt action stuff, there's no ethical quandary because it's historical stuff. If somebody wants to make a version of a tank that's better than Warlords and better, and you can scale it yourself, then why not? Even one of the staff members that I spoke to said, yeah, I get the Warlord infantry models, but I 3D print all my own tanks. He did a lot of 3D printing. He was very particular with having scale being correct. And when you look at these Jeeps, that's not right. That Jeep's too small for these US airborne lads. So yeah, we'll leave it there because I've rambled a little bit and this is going to require quite a bit of editing. I'll be back soon with another option for you guys. In the meantime, sound off below. Have you tried bolt action? Have you ever been curious about bolt action? As I said, the third edition is coming out in September. It's a very stable game. They're not looking at 6-month data sheet updates here. Right, I'm going to leave it there because I'm rambling, and I'll catch you guys on the next one. Bye.